There was a moment when I knew I should leave. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just clearly. Calmly. With a certainty so sharp it almost felt peaceful. I remember standing still, feeling that quiet internal click, the sound of a decision finally ready to be made. And I didn't take it? That moment didn't punish me immediately. That's the cruel part. Nothing collapsed. No one shouted. The world didn't react at all. Life simply continued, and I took that as proof that staying had been the right choice. I was wrong. People talk about leaving as the hard option. They don't talk enough about the cost of staying when your inner voice has already packed its bags. I told myself I was being loyal, patient, strong. That endurance was a virtue. That walking away would mean failure, moral failure, emotional failure, weakness. So I stayed. At first, staying felt noble. I absorbed discomfort quietly. I adjusted. I minimized myself where necessary. I told myself this was what adults did. They compromised, they endured, they didn't run every time something felt wrong. The line between commitment and self-erasure is thinner than we admit. The environment I stayed in wasn't abusive in an obvious way. That made it harder. Nothing was bad enough. There were good days. Laughable moments. Proof, always proof, that leaving would be an overreaction. That's how staying traps you. It gives you just enough comfort to doubt your own clarity. Over time, something subtle began to change inside me. My reactions dulled. My thoughts slowed. I started answering questions automatically, without checking whether I agreed. My life became something I was managing rather than inhabiting. I stopped imagining alternatives. That felt dangerous. Hope became something I avoided, because hope makes staying unbearable. I told myself that this phase would pass. That things would improve. That I just needed to be more understanding, more flexible, more patient. But patience, when pointed in the wrong direction, becomes erosion. I remember the first time I felt envy towards someone who left their life behind. Not envy of success or freedom, envy of decisiveness. Of the courage to accept loss upfront instead of paying for it slowly. I judged them harshly, of course. I told myself they were impulsive, selfish, immature. That judgment was armor. Deep down, I was terrified they had done what I couldn't. The nights became longer. Sleep turned shallow. I would lie awake rehearsing conversations I never had. Endings I never initiated. Apologies for a departure that hadn't happened and, I was beginning to realize, might never happen at all. The worst part wasn't the discomfort. It was the quiet sense of disappearing. I stopped recognizing myself in my own choices. My days were full, but not meaningful. Busy, but strangely hollow. I was present everywhere except inside my own life. And still I stayed. Because leaving would require admitting that the moment I ignored had been real, that my clarity had been accurate. That by staying, I hadn't preserved anything, I had delayed a loss and multiplied it. Staying became a daily decision. A small surrender repeated so often it stopped feeling like a choice. People around me assumed consent. Stability. Acceptance. They built expectations on my silence. I watched my own future harden into something I hadn't chosen but felt responsible for anyway. That's when fear replaced doubt. Fear that if I didn't leave soon, I wouldn't be able to leave at all. Fear that the version of me capable of choosing differently was already fading. Fear that one day I would wake up and realize the exit no longer existed, not because it was locked, but because I no longer believed I was allowed to use it. I began to understand something terrifying: staying doesn't preserve who you are. It reshapes you into someone who can tolerate staying. And tolerance is not the same as living. The moment I should have left didn't disappear. It followed me. It waited in the background of every conversation, every plan, every promise I made without conviction. It became a silent witness to my life. And the longer I ignored it, the louder it grew, not as a voice, but as exhaustion. As numbness. As the slow grief of watching time pass without feeling present for it. I didn't know yet how much this choice would cost me. I only knew that by staying, I had begun paying with something I would never get back. After the moment passed, staying stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like inertia. I didn't wake up each morning choosing to remain. I woke up already there, already committed, already explaining to myself why today wasn't the right day to change anything. There's a particular kind of trap that forms when you tell yourself you've already invested too much to leave. Time becomes leverage against you. Every month that passes whispers the same lie, now it would be a waste. You begin to treat your past endurance as proof that future endurance is required. That's how I justified everything. I told myself that leaving later would hurt more people. That staying was kinder. That stability mattered more than authenticity. These explanations sounded reasonable enough to silence the discomfort but not strong enough to erase it. Something inside me started shrinking. I noticed it in small ways. I stopped reacting strongly to things I used to care about. Music passed through me without landing. Achievements felt neutral. Disappointments felt expected. Emotional peaks and valleys flattened into a long, gray stretch of sameness. I wasn't depressed in the way people recognize. I was functional. Reliable. Presentable. I was also profoundly absent. The environment I stayed in demanded adaptability. And I adapted. Too well. I became fluent in self-editing. I knew which thoughts to suppress, which desires to reinterpret, which impulses to delay indefinitely. Over time, those impulses didn't come as often. That scared me, because when wanting disappears, it doesn't mean you've found peace. It means you've learned to survive without hope. People praised my patience. My resilience. They said I handled things so maturely. I nodded and accepted the compliment, even as it hollowed me out. They were congratulating me for enduring a life I no longer believed in. I began to resent that praise. Not because it was false, but because it trapped me. It reinforced the version of me that stayed. It made leaving feel like a betrayal of a reputation I had never consciously chosen. The moral dilemma tightened. If I left, I would be the one who gave up. The one who couldn't handle things. The one who walked away after all this time. People would rewrite my story in ways that made sense to them, and none of those versions would include my inner truth. If I stayed, I would continue disappearing quietly, politely, in a way that required no explanation and no confrontation. Neither option felt clean. But one of them felt lethal. I started losing track of time. Weeks blurred together. Days felt interchangeable. I lived in a state of postponement, always waiting for a better moment to act. That moment never came because moments don't come to people who refuse to move. The inner voice that had once been clear became faint. Not gone, but weakened. It spoke less often, and when it did, I doubted it. I told myself it was just restlessness. Ingratitude. Fear of responsibility. Gaslighting yourself is surprisingly easy when the alternative requires courage. I tried to change things from within. Small adjustments. New routines. Minor acts of rebellion that didn't disrupt the larger structure. I told myself that transformation didn't require departure. But those efforts felt cosmetic. Like rearranging furniture in a house you already know you'll never love. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was humiliating. Someone asked me a simple question, something about my future, and I realized I had no answer that wasn't borrowed. No vision that wasn't built around endurance. No desire that wasn't immediately followed by an apology inside my own head. I smiled, deflected, changed the subject. And afterward, alone, I felt a wave of grief so sharp it nearly took my breath away. Not grief for what I had lost but for what I was still losing, every day I stayed. I understood then that staying wasn't neutral. It was active harm just slow enough to be socially acceptable. The realization didn't empower me immediately. It frightened me. Because by then, leaving felt bigger than it ever had. More entangled. More consequential. The longer you stay, the more your exit resembles destruction even when it's actually survival. I felt trapped by my own decency. By my desire not to hurt anyone. By the version of myself that had learned to prioritize peace over truth. And beneath all of that, a darker fear waited. What if I left and discovered there was nothing left of me to build with? Staying had eroded me so gradually that I wasn't sure who would walk out the door if I finally opened it. I had become someone who endured, not someone who chose. Someone who managed, not someone who lived. That fear almost kept me there forever. Because sometimes it feels safer to disappear slowly than to confront the possibility that you've already vanished. I stood in that uncertainty for a long time, suspended between a life I no longer believed in and an unknown that terrified me. And then something shifted. Not hope. Not courage. Urgency. A quiet, unmistakable sense that if I didn't leave soon, I wouldn't just lose the chance, I would lose the capacity. That the part of me capable of choosing differently was running out of oxygen. That was the moment I understood the true cost of staying. It wasn't time. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't reputation. It was myself. Leaving didn't happen the way I imagined it would. There was no surge of courage, no clean sense of relief. What finally pushed me wasn't hope, it was the fear of waking up one day and realizing I had become incapable of wanting anything at all. I left quietly. No speeches. No grand explanations. I untangled myself from my life the way you remove a splinter that's been there too long, slowly, carefully, knowing it will hurt no matter how gently you do it. Each step felt unreal, as if I were watching someone else dismantle a future I had helped build but never truly inhabited. The reactions came later. Confusion first. Then disappointment. Then the subtle moral judgment that comes when people can't reconcile your decision with the version of you they relied on. I watched my departure get translated into simpler stories: burnout, instability, selfishness, a phase. I let them have those versions. Trying to explain would have meant reopening a life I was barely strong enough to leave. The first weeks after I left were brutal in a different way. Not painful, empty. The structure that had contained me for so long was gone, and with it the constant pressure that had defined my days. I expected relief. What I got was disorientation. I didn't know how to be without endurance. I woke up unsure of what I was supposed to tolerate now that tolerating was no longer required. The silence felt accusatory. Every free hour asked a question I wasn't ready to answer: who are you, when you're not staying out of obligation? Guilt followed me everywhere. Every moment of peace felt undeserved. Every laugh felt premature. I kept expecting punishment, some external confirmation that leaving had been wrong. It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and more unsettling: my own presence. Without constant suppression, my thoughts returned slowly. Awkwardly. Desires appeared in fragments, tentative and unsure, like animals stepping back into a burned forest. I didn't trust them at first. I had lived too long without listening inward. I learned to move slowly, to make small choices without immediately questioning their legitimacy. To sit with discomfort without interpreting it as a sign I should go back. Some days, the regret hit hard. Not regret for leaving, regret for staying as long as I did. For the years I spent negotiating with a life I already knew wasn't mine. That grief didn't ask for forgiveness. It asked to be felt. I let it. Over time, something unexpected happened. The urgency that had driven me out softened into clarity. I stopped seeing my past self as weak. I saw them as afraid and trying to survive with the tools they had. That compassion mattered. Because blame would have kept me tied to the same pattern, just in reverse. The life I live now doesn't look impressive from the outside. It isn't optimized. It isn't safe in the way my old life was. But it has something that was missing before: responsiveness. When something feels wrong, I pay attention. When something feels right, I don't immediately explain it away. I learned that leaving isn't failure. Sometimes it's an acknowledgement of truth delayed too long. If there's a lesson here, it isn't inspirational. It's inconvenient. Staying is not always strength. Endurance is not always virtue. And loyalty to a life that erases you is not nobility, it's fear-wearing discipline. I stayed because I didn't want to hurt anyone. I stayed because I didn't want to admit I was wrong. I stayed because leaving would have forced me to confront the cost of my own clarity. But clarity doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It waits. And the longer you wait, the more it charges. Leaving didn't give me happiness. It gave me authorship. For the first time in years, my life responds to me. Even when it's hard. Even when it's uncertain. Even when it disappoints others. And that, I've learned, is the difference between living and enduring. If you're listening to this and standing in your own moment, the quiet one, the clear one, the moment you keep postponing, know this: the cost of leaving is paid once. The cost of staying is paid every day. I paid daily for too long. This is me, finally choosing to stop.